Hey Wargamers, today we're going to talk about these guys. Tau Commanders. They are probably the best, or if not one of the best units in the new Tau Codex. And yeah, we're going to talk about their strengths, weaknesses, and how you might want to use them in a two-part series. So today we're going to talk about kind of the generals for the commanders, talk about their special rules, what makes them different, and the general strategy for each of those, as well as the stratagems that you might want to use with them. And then in the next video, we'll go over the loadout and specific tactics for each one of these variants. I'm not going to talk about the special characters, Shadow Sun and Farsight, in detail. They'll be their own videos. They have their own thing going on, but I will mention them as examples here and there. All right, so let's get into it. Before we do, though, I want to say thanks for watching. If you like this video, go ahead, hit like, subscribe, and the notification bell. That way you don't miss any of my upcoming unit reviews, battle reports, or other 40K content. Okay, so one of the defining characteristics of commanders in the actual codex and not the index is that there is a strict one commander per detachment limit that applies to all commanders, including Farsight and Shadow Sun, no matter what flavor you bring. And so you can only ever have a maximum of 3 commanders in a 2,000 point army, and variations on that theme for different point levels. But really, you are limited severely in the number of commanders that you can bring. This is a huge departure from the index, where people would bring as many commanders as they could fit into a list. But now you can only bring up to 3. Personally, that's not that big of a deal, because a lot of lists that are not commander spammy, you'd only want to bring 1 to 3 commanders anyway. So unless you were going all in on commanders, you'd only have enough points to really bring that number anyway. So it shouldn't impact how you build a list tremendously. However, the bigger component is that it's the 1 per detachment. So you have to build an entire detachment around a single commander. That means that you can't just bring 3 commanders in like a Supreme Command detachment, because that's 1 detachment. You can only have 1 commander in that detachment. You'd have to fill the other slots with Fireblades or Ethereals if you're not playing Farsight, stuff like that. So you have to bring multiple detachments, and that's really where the complication comes in. So keep that in mind. Most lists today are probably not going to have a full 3 commanders in them, just because of the tax or the extra baggage that is associated with bringing those other detachments. But yeah, so there are 3 different types of commanders that you can bring. All of them fall under that rule. Let's start off looking at their profiles. So for 72 points, you can bring a commander in a standard crisis suit, a standard Xv8 Crisis suit. And this basically sets the bar for the stat line and profile for the other 2 commanders as well. He has movement 8, weapon skill 3 up, ballistic skill 2 up, strength 5, toughness 5, 5 wounds, 4 attacks, leadership 9, and a 3-up save. Those are pretty much going to be consistent throughout. The difference for an Enforcer and a Coldstar is that they have 6 wounds instead of 5, and then of course they cost more. So an Enforcer suit costs an additional 4 points, and a Coldstar costs an additional 14 points over that. So you're looking at 90 points for a Coldstar. But overall, these are not extremely expensive units. They do a fair amount of work, and you can tell based on their stat line that they are durable, high output gun platforms that are pretty darn mobile. The exception for the Coldstar, of course, is that he moves 20 inches and then has a special rule that allows him to advance 20 inches. So you can get 40 inches of movement out of a Coldstar. But either way, they're fast, reliable gun platforms. All right, so their special rules. All commanders have the same 3 special rules. They have For the Greater Good, allowing them to fire Overwatch for nearby friendly units. They have Master of War, which allows you to either call Kao Yun or Ma Ka at the beginning of your turn. Keep in mind that has to be done at the beginning of your turn. You can't get halfway through your turn and be like, oh yeah, no, I want to call Kao Yun today, and I forgot to do it. So, can you let me wiggle that in? No, you can't do that. Your opponent might let you do that, but that's technically against the rules because you're making a decision at that point that's informed by what's happened previously. So one of the caveats or one of the restrictions of Master of War is that you have to be a Master of War yourself. You have to have the foresight to use this ahead of time. So yes, you have to call that at the beginning of the turn. Cao Yan allows you to re-roll all failed hit rolls in the shooting phase, or I guess until the end of your turn technically. And then Manka allows you to advance and shoot as if you had not moved that turn. And that applies to all models within 6 inches of the commander, including the commander himself. I forgot to mention, Cao Yan you can only use if you don't move. So if you call Cao Yan and your unit moves, then they no longer benefit from that strat or from that ability. And so both of these have really solid uses tactically. And I used to think that Manka was the superior choice. Now with the introduction of Seps, the ability or the importance of Manka is a little bit diminished because of things like the Vior-La Sep trait. So having Vior-La means that you don't need Manka as much, and so having the access to Cao Yan is going to be potentially better in more situations now than it was before the introduction of the codex. Cao Yan is going to be really valuable early on in the game when you have the most units available to utilize it. You're going to call this turn 1, maybe turn 2, when you have a bunch of units clustered around your commander. Especially with the introduction of the rules that prevent deep striking in the beginning of turn 1, you are going to have a lot more units close by commander early on in the game, and so you're going to be able to leverage Cao Yan more effectively. So calling this at the beginning of your turn when you have the most units available is really going to allow you to punch the enemy pretty hard that first turn or two when you use it. The Manka ability is, in my opinion, a little bit more of a late game ability. You're going to use it when you have a commander and some other supporting units off near an objective, and they need to be able to shoot but still capture that objective, or they need to get away from a unit that's closing in on them, something like that. This is a far more tactical option in terms of how you actually move and in your overall objectives in the game, whereas Cao Yan is just kind of a blunt force tool. Manka is a little bit more subtle, a little bit more nuanced, and you have to figure out exactly when you're going to use it. The trick with either of these is remembering to use them, though, right? Like, you can go a whole game and walk away from the table and realize that you didn't use Master of War. So keep it in mind. Remind yourself. Figure out a way to remember to use Master of War. And then they have Manta Strike, right? So Manta Strike is deep striking. This is going to be the most useful on your Enforcer battlesuit. The reason for that is that the Enforcer battlesuit is a little bit more durable than the Crisis version, than the Xv8 version, and not as mobile as the Coldstar. So the Enforcer suit is really kind of the guy that I think of that's going to be deep striking. The Coldstar is going to be moving to where he wants to be, and the Crisis version is going to be just kind of hanging out and back. So for that reason, the Enforcer is probably the most likely you're going to want to deep strike, although your mileage may vary. You might run into a situation where that's not the right answer. Okay. So those are their special rules. The general approach for each of these, like I said, I'm going to talk about weapon loadouts and specific tactics for each of these in the next video. But for now, let's kind of just talk about how you might want to use each of these 3 units. So again, starting with the standard Crisis suit, this is going to be something that's kind of more of a gunline commander. He's not going to be running around, grabbing objectives, pushing the enemy away. He's going to be hanging out and back with your fire warriors, with your broadsides, with your hammerheads, and giving them Cao Yan turn 1. He's going to be helping with various stratagems, things like that, and not necessarily taking a real aggressive role. He's going to be sitting back. He's going to be much more similar to the commanders of 7th edition than the commanders that we have in 8th edition. For the Enforcer battlesuit, this is again where you get a little bit more aggressive. He might be deep striking. He might be, if you're starting off with Vior-La or something, he might be starting on the front line and running around a little bit more. But because he has that extra wound, he's going to be a little bit more durable and a little bit more able to deal with some punchback from the enemy. So you want him to be a little bit more aggressive, but not going, not going apeshit and just diving into the enemy line. He's not going to be able to survive that, but he has a little bit more standing power. So again, have him be aggressive, but always have him be protected. All these guys have the character keyword, meaning that they can't be targeted unless they are the closest unit. And so having something to protect them, like a Riptide, like stealth suits, like a Ghost Kill, anything else, really, any type of screen is going to be critical to using them. And the more aggressive the commander, the more important that is. So with a Crisis suit commander, you're going to have that protection, basically without trying. With an Enforcer, you're going to have some planning and make sure that works out. And then with a Coldstar, our third option, you're going to have the most planning. You're going to have to put the most thought into how you're going to protect your Coldstar, because yes, he's a character, he's pretty durable, similar to the Enforcer, but he only has a handful of wounds, right? So it's not impossible to kill him. It's really easy to kill him, actually, if he gets caught out of position. So you need to support him with drones and other units to make sure that he stays on the table. It's really tempting to have the Coldstar just bomb a unit on turn one, like, oh hey, there's my target, I'm going to go after it immediately. And sometimes that pays off, right? You have to do the calculation, cost benefit in your head. If I lose this commander that's worth 150 points, am I going to kill at least 150 points of units if I bomb this unit on the other side of the table? And more often than not, I think the answer is probably no. But there are cases where you can actually pull it off. So make that calculation in your head. Don't be short-tempered and what's the word? Impulsive. Impulsive is the word I was looking for there. And speaking of impulse and doing what you want to do, let's talk about stratagems. So I think there's basically 3 different tiers of stratagems that you can use with a commander, regardless of what it is. The first tier is command and control node and NeuroWeb system jammer. Bam. I know you can't read that, but I'm assuming you guys have your own cards, because if you don't have your own cards, what are you doing? Get your cards immediately, especially if you're not watching this just for educational purposes. Cards are your best friend, and they are going to help you utilize your stratagems much more effectively than if you have to try to remember them without any type of visual cue. All right, so command and control node is something that used to be a piece of war gear. Now it is a stratagem, and it says use this stratagem at the start of your shooting phase. Pick a sept commander from your army. That commander may not shoot this phase, but one sept battlesuit unit from your army that is within 6 inches of that commander may reroll failed wound rolls this phase. So you're basically giving up shooting from your commander to benefit a nearby battlesuit unit. So something like a Riptide, unit Crisis suits, unit broadsides. These are going to be the types of units that you target with a command and control node. And again, there's some really sophisticated mathematics that have to go into this to figure out if it's actually worth it. So sophisticated, in fact, that I don't think there's a good way to actually do it beforehand. You kind of have to do a little bit of a gut check during the game. But really, it's going to depend on the weapon loadout of your commander, the target that you're shooting at, and the weapon loadout and profile of the battlesuit unit that you're benefiting, right? So if your commander has a bunch of fusion blasters and the enemy is 30 inches away, it's probably not going to hurt you to use your command and control node to boost that battlesuit unit that has range 30 inches, because you're not going to be able to shoot anyway. So that's going to be really different than if the opponent is 12 inches away and your commander has a bunch of fusion blasters that you could actually use. So it's a complicated mathematic, but you have to kind of figure out if you're actually going to be gaining more than you lose from giving up your commander. Your commander is one of the most reliable and offensive units that you have, and by having him not shoot, you are really you're really sacrificing something. So make sure that your unit that you are shooting is actually having a good chance of making up for that loss. But this can be really good if used in the correct situation. Near Web System Jammer, use this stratagem at the start of the enemy shooting phase, so note that you don't have to make this decision ahead of time. You can wait till the enemy unit starts their shooting phase and be like, oh yeah, by the way, pick an enemy unit that is within 18 inches of the battlesuit commander, not a short distance. That's a pretty big footprint. Your opponent must subtract 1 from hit rolls made for that unit this phase. Now, this is something that's really useful just in general, right? Especially against things with lower ballistic skills. You're going to be, having or a thirding the number of successful hits they get. But you could also think about it in a way like if they're hitting on 2s and you make them hit on 3s, now you're doubling the number of units that you're saving, basically. So it gives you more defensive ability in that context. Either way that you look at it, this is going to be something that helps out pretty usefully, pretty consistently. It's 2 command points, so it's not cheap. But really, if there's a high power or high volume of fire unit that is going to be targeting a sensitive unit, like let's say your commander gets caught out of position, the Near Web System Jammer is going to be really useful. So if we're bringing something like a Coldstar and you do decide to bomb a target turn 1 or turn 2, you're going to be able to use this and give him just a little bit more hope for survival. And that can be extremely useful. This is something that's going to save a lot of guys potentially in the right situation. So don't forget about your System Jammer. The second tier of stratagems are things like Automated Repair System and Multi-Spectrum Sensor Suite. These are things that are generalist stratagems that can be used on any battle suit, but and for that reason, I think there are generally going to be better targets for this. But let's say you're not bringing a bunch of battle suits, you only have a couple commanders, then these are going to be things that you are going to be using on your commanders more often than not. So Automated Repair allows you to regain D3 lost wounds on a vehicle or battle suit. So a lot of times this is going to be something that I'm going to use on a Riptide to kind of keep him in the top tier of performance, or at least not in the bottom tier, and kind of mitigate enemy shooting that way. So Automated Repair Systems on a Riptide or a Ivara, anything with tiered wounds is going to be valuable. But if you only have a commander and you want to keep that commander alive, repair systems are going to be your friend there as well. That's 2 command points. And then the Multi-Spectrum Sensor Suite is 1, and this allows you to, while you use this stratagem before a battlesuit unit from your army shoots, enemy units cannot claim the benefit of cover against the shots made by that unit this phase. So again, a commander doesn't have a ton of shots. Even if you gave them Cyclic Ion Blasters, that's not a ton of shots. And a lot of times you're going to be able to leverage this ability better with things like Riptides or Broadsides, things that have a higher volume of fire. But in general, this is going to be something that, if you have a lower AP weapon like Cyclic Ion Blasters, this is going to make a difference. If you're bringing something like Quad Fusion Commander, don't bother with your Multi-Spectrum Sensor Suite because you're already at -4. They're probably not going to get cover anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But if you have like a -1 or -2 weapon, using this is going to be beneficial. All right, and then the third tier are things that you're probably not going to use very often at all. The first is the Failsafe Detonator. Essentially, if a battlesuit dies, you can, battlesuit, whether it's a commander or a Riptide or whatever, you roll a 4-up for all enemy units within 3 inches of that unit, and they take a mortal wound on a 4-up. So again, not something that's going to really make a difference most of the time. I'm not going to spend a command point to do maybe 1 or 2 wounds, but in the right situation, let's say you have a really high priority target like a Titan or some big bad unit, an Exarch, not Exarch, a Primarch. You have them and they just have 1 wound left, and you need to get that 1 last wound in to save yourself a whole nother turn of bad feelings. Then this might actually be worth it. But if you're going up against a full strength unit, taking out 1 guy, probably not going to make a difference. So save your command point. And then the last one is Orbital Ion-Beam. This is something that's 3 command points. Normally that would make it essentially unusable, but with the changes to detachment command points, Battalion is now giving you 5 command points. I think this is much more likely to be used. Still pretty sketchy, but it's not out of the question that you'll have enough command points to be able to actually justify the cost here. So Orbital Ion-Beam, use this stratagem in your shooting phase if a Tau Empire commander from your army did not move or use their Manta Strike ability in the preceding movement phase. So probably not going to be using it with the Coldstar, but again, something like a standard Crisis commander, maybe. Pick 2 points on the battlefield 2d6 inches apart. Draw an imaginary straight line 1 millimeter wide between these 2 points and roll a dice for each unit, friend or foe, that has models under this line. So 2d6, that's on average going to be 7 inches. So it's not a huge line, but 7 inches can get a lot of work done. So subtract 1 from the result if the unit being rolled for is a character. On a 4 or plus, the unit being rolled suffers D3 mortal wounds. This stratagem can only be used once per battle. So this is something that if you have, like, a soup army, or I guess you can't really have soup armies anymore, but if you have a army that has a bunch of small units that are all clustered together, like an MSU type of build with a bunch of characters, a bunch of small units, really like Imperium lists are what I'm thinking of here. This can actually do a fair amount of damage on them if you get the right rolls, right? It's totally possible that you roll 2d6 and you get 2 1s and your points are 2 inches apart. You're going to get 1 unit under that line. But if you get 12 inches, you can get a fair number of units under that line. The problem is going to be exploiting the enemy's deployment and movement in a way that really capitalizes on this. So this is going to be something you're going to use turn 1, turn 2 when the most units are on the board. And it's also going to be one of those kind of got ya moments where no one is expecting the Orbital Ion-Beam to come at them. So again, pretty sketchy, unreliable, situational, but it is something that requires a commander, so it ties in with what we're talking about today. So those are the 3 tiers of stratagems that you might want to use with your commander. Overall, again, your Crisis commander is going to be your gunline commander. He's not going to be very mobile, but he's going to have kind of weapons that support that role. The Enforcer battlesuit is going to be a little bit more aggressive. He might be your deep striker. And then the Coldstar is going to be your highly mobile, very aggressive commander. So 3 different tiers of aggression, 3 different loadouts to mirror that, and that's what we'll talk about in the next part of this video, is how you actually want to load out and deploy and use these 3 different types of commanders. So stay tuned to that. If you're watching this in the future, I'll put a link in the description below. But of course, thanks for watching and happy wargaming. Hey everyone, this video was made possible by my supporters over on Patreon. If you also enjoyed this video, consider joining our community over there. Special thanks to Max Harrison, NoExcusesPanda, Paul Leuders, TauOswell, Nick Steele, Jared Egeler, Brian Mann, Jake Johnson, Eric Jackson, Christopher Sorrell, Youhei Penguin, Andy M. Young, Peter Benjamin Parker, and Giovanni DiMaggio.